Thank you very much, Lars Robert, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be addressing this most critical of topics for our industry. I'm going to focus on the kinds of challenges, the things which will affect how we progress with this challenge, what enables progress, and what are the obstacles of it. And I think with a clearer view of those two areas, that we have a better chance of really dealing with the challenge. Before I go further, just a quick word of introduction. Wallenius Wilhelmsen is a deep-sea ro-ro shipping company. We are as global gets. We've been around for 160 or so years at this stage. We've seen a lot of change, but I think it's probably still safe to say this is the biggest change yet. We operate a fleet of 130 of these big beautiful ships here, 80 of which we own. And just to put it in perspective, we consumed about 1.7 million tons of fuel last year, or 5 million tons of CO2. So this is a very, very big issue for us. But let's start by looking at the role of shipping in the world, at the broadest sense. Shipping has been a driver of prosperity and of progress, and because of those two combined, you could even say peace, for generations. It is a central role in the development of the world. It is, I think you can say, an indispensable industry. However, we've got a very big issue to deal with, and there isn't any escaping from that. We have a significant emissions footprint. We need to address it. So this is a huge challenge, and there are vast uncertainties and unknowns that go with it. What kind of future fuels or future energy solutions are going to work best for the kind of vessels that you operate? What will be the price of these fuels in the future? These are huge questions, and you might feel intimidated by it. There may be no apparent answers at the moment, but let me just say one thing to reassure you. One thing that I think we can say with confidence for the future: there will be shipping. I don't know what form it will take. I don't know what will drive it, but I'm pretty confident there is going to be shipping. And so I think then the question is, if your company is really approaching this question, is, well, let's focus with the IMO targets rather first. We have to achieve a relative reduction of at least 40% by 2030 relative to 2008. That's a big challenge by itself. The regulatory process to identify what measures will be created to meet that challenge are under negotiation at IMO. I think it will be wise to expect the first new kind of regulation in 2022 or 2023. For our own fleet, we've had a 32% improvement in carbon intensity since 2008 up till 2018. So there is still work to be done, but it's doable. I think maybe the bigger challenge, longer term, is the industry have to achieve an absolute reduction in total greenhouse gas of at least 50% compared to 2008 by 2050. Now, the number that might jump out of you at that is 50%, but if you actually factor in the growth in the fleet, what we're probably talking about is an average vessel reduction in emissions of somewhere between 75 to 80%. And so, if that's the average, I think what that implies is that we've got to have zero emission vessels. Also, useful to keep in mind that phasing out carbon or decarbonisation as soon as possible is another target. So, what's the wider meaning of these challenges? What will be the CapEx, the capital expenditure, or the operational expenditure increases that can be expected? I guess it's a very hard question to answer, and it will vary from company to company, but would be wise to expect that there will be some. What kind of changes might this have to the service that the industry offers? That's entirely possible. It's not something that we've seen so far as a result of environmental regulation, but don't bet against it for this. And then, what might this mean for the competitive landscape? Are the competitors that you have today, are they going to be the same competitors that you have for the future? Well, I think there's one thing you might also say about what to expect, and that's all of these. It's not going to be one or other, it's more likely to be all of these challenges together. And I think that with this decarbonisation challenge, there will be winners and there will be losers. It's that big, it's that fundamental. And I think to determine what side of this equation you end up on will be in large part affected by a corporate mentality. I think that companies who take the initiative stand themselves in better stead than those who wait and react. So maybe, you know, for most people that climbing a mountain is a big life achievement. Getting married may be a big life achievement. Getting married and climbing a mountain at the same time, that's the kind of scale of challenge, the ambition that I think is warranted here. Fortune will favour the brave. So that's a very important part of corporate mentality. I think another is that we've got to get used to being in the spotlight. Ours is an industry that happens over the horizon and out of sight. We're not very used to being in the spotlight, but as Reinhard just mentioned a moment ago, at the top political level, we are in focus now. And so we had better get comfortable with this. And I think more than getting comfortable, we should really think about how can we use that to our advantage. And I've got an idea that I'll share with you a little later in the presentation on how we can help ourselves using public relations. So then if we talk about the approach of companies, I think that partnership is really going to be a huge part of successful approach. Because this challenge is bigger than any one company. Even the biggest players in this industry are saying, we can't do this by ourselves. We need resources, experience, capital from across the value chain to make progress. What we can do together is greater than what we can do as individuals. And I think the other part of this, and it's related, is that we should be prepared to engage with multiple different stakeholders, not just on the supply side, but we need to engage with media and with regulatory affairs and with our investors, the whole lot. So I was looking for a picture of a swamp. We need to get into the swamp and get used to working in the swamp. I didn't find a picture of people in a swamp, but rugby is fairly close to it on a wet day. Okay, so let's talk about shift now to innovation, because it should be very obvious to all of us, I'm sure, that what's got us to this point as an industry is not going to be what gets us to where we need to go. So a key part in actually achieving progress for the future will be innovation. Now, here's an interesting thought, I think, is that we're a global industry. We're the original global industry, but we're also a hidden industry. We happen out of sight. We're not first to mind for the world's innovators, and that's something that we need to address. Because if we're going to give ourselves the best possible opportunity to decarbonize in the shortest amount of time, bearing in mind that time is not on our side, then we're going to have to cast that net for innovation as widely as we possibly can. We need to emerge into full view. That's part of what we can do to put ourselves in the spotlight. So it's time for us to be attractive. We need to broadcast our challenges to the whole world. And fundamentally, what are those challenges with decarbonisation? This is about energy storage and energy generation. And I ask you this, are those challenges unique to the shipping industry? I don't think that they are. It's the same challenges which towns and cities and factories are facing. Any consumer of huge volumes, huge amounts of energy, they're having this question too. So it's entirely possible then that the solutions that are being developed for other sectors may also be relevant for our industry. And this is an opportunity for the world's innovators. If you think about what our industry spends on energy per year, and this is a very rough figure, but at least $100 billion per year on energy, okay? Now, we know that in the fullness of time, we're going to, the energy source that we're using today is going to be largely not, if not entirely phased out and replaced with something else. So that means that there's a $100 billion potential market. It won't happen right away, but it will develop over time. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that opportunity? So, I think this is a very important point here as well. We need to make shipping sexy again. Not just for the world's innovators though, but also for young talent who are considering, students coming out of university, thinking about what industry do we want to go towards? Why could it not be shipping? Instead of going to Wall Street or to one of the tech giants. Ours is an industry which was very sexy years ago. You joined our industry and you get a ticket to see the world, literally. What happened? Today, we're not regarded quite as positively as we were then. But I think if you present the challenge that we have, that we are an essential and an indispensable global industry, one which has got a huge challenge to overcome. Who wouldn't want to be part of making that transition possible, instead of creating another app? Okay? So I think that this is part of what we can do for ourselves, is be more attractive as an industry. I think we need to address the scale of innovation in our industry as well. We are what they call one of these hard-to-abate sectors. We're having this conversation, we're having this conference, because this is hard. We don't know what the answers are going to be. Very likely that solutions aren't going to be ready next year, or even the next time you want to build a ship. There's a real dilemma. But we have to try and make progress, and as soon as possible, because the regulatory pressure is building on all sides, not just at IMO. So I think what really helps here, if we make an effort to accelerate the global scale and coordination of innovation for our industry. I don't think the level of innovation that we have today, I think it's generally quite fragmented and it's low level compared to the challenge that we have. But we can change that. And there is a proposal which is being developed by a number of the industry's leading representative organizations to create an international maritime research development board to administer an international maritime research development fund all under the auspices of IMO. That would help to de-risk new solutions. It would help to accelerate their development, to bring them to scale. And I think that's something which, if you're not familiar with it, maybe ask some questions and lend it your support if you think it's a good idea. I certainly do. So, what kind of progress are we looking for? On what front? Well, I think there are three different ways of looking at this. First of all, there's an existing fleet of 50,000 vessels. We want to continuously improve their performance. For us, that incremental improvement, that 32% reduction in carbon intensity that I mentioned that we've achieved, this is part of our core business function, our central focus, permanent focus on reducing fuel consumption. For us, it's our biggest single cost. So that's business as usual, and there are lots of things which we're doing in that space. I think then we also need to think about, well, the step reduction, getting to carbon neutral. That's a future fuel kind of question. What is the fuel that we could drop into today's vessels that could get them to carbon neutral? A huge step forward in progress. There are a number of things which we're working on, and we don't know for certain what's going to turn out to be successful here. It could be a biofuel, most likely I think for carbon neutral that probably will be. But for some vessels it may be a biogas if they're already equipped to do with gas. But the final destination that we've got with this is, of course, zero emissions. Now, we developed this zero emission concept vessel, we call it the Orcel. That was already back in 2005. And one thing I can tell you with confidence about the Orcel is that a vessel that looks exactly like that is probably never going to be built. But at least it gives us something to set our direction and to measure our progress towards. And it's like a lightning rod for innovation. it attracts ideas. You really give a signal to the world's innovators that, yes, we're interested in new things and big ideas, ambitious projects. So I think these three ideas that we're looking for. Now, when it comes to solutions, we have a tendency in this most technical industry to think, immediately turn to the engineers and say, well, what kind of piece of equipment will it be this time? And that's absolutely relevant here now too. But it's not the only area where innovation can come from. We can also have operational innovation. We can adjust the speed we sail at, we can adjust the power on vessels. There are a number of different avenues which we could follow to deliver the kind of results that we need. There's also a possibility for market kinds of solutions. If you were to create a zero emission or a carbon neutral service, perhaps you can attract customers to that, something which puts you in a different competitive space. And then there are possibilities to innovate in terms of the business model. We're all focused on shipping, but the products that we move are part of an outbound, in our case, value chain. And rather than looking at each link of the chain individually, could we not actually, is there an opportunity to improve by looking at the totality? In our world, there certainly is. Okay, so a lot of talk about innovation. What makes a good idea stack up? Well, I think there are 5 different elements here. It needs to make financial sense. That one's quite obvious. It needs to make technical sense. If we're talking about a new fuel, is that fuel compatible with the vessels, the fleet that I have today? It needs to make operational sense. Staying with the fuel analogy, is the future fuel, is it available in the quantities and the locations where I need it to be relative to my operations? It needs to make commercial sense, and this point is very often overlooked. If you adopt this new type of solution, will it allow you to remain competitive in the market? And as one possible case in point here, if you were to adopt full sailing ships, those ships are going to be subject to the vagaries of the wind, if it blows or if it doesn't. And so you may not be able to guarantee the same transit time or as fast a transit time as your competitors. How does your market feel about that? So it's a point, doesn't mean, my point with any of these is not to say, well, this solution or that solution is the future or isn't the future. These are points that have to be considered. And then, does it make political sense? My go-to example here is nuclear power. Because even if the technical and the cost side of it were okay, there is likely to be quite a bit of work to be done to overcome the objection that you will have from ports of bringing a vessel in on nuclear power. So the challenge that I've laid out there in the previous slide, that seems great. And you think, well, how can we possibly make progress? And I just want to say something about the frame of reference for our industry. We're in a changing environment here. Now, there was mention in the introduction about Sulphur 2020. Think about this. If you were trying to sell a 0.5% fuel 6 months ago, good luck, no market. But now, if you're trying to sell a 0.5% product, you have suddenly got a market of 200 million tons per year. And why did that happen? It's because the regulatory frame of reference changed. The rules are changing. But it's not the only thing which can affect the frame of reference. Innovation can change the frame of reference too. There's nothing to say that solutions which are environmentally superior are always and forever going to be more expensive. There are solutions which actually marry both of those environmental and economic imperative, marry them together already today. But we need more of them. We need more innovation. And then there's the demand side. We certainly see this in our customer base, is that their demands for information and for progress are increasing all the time. And we're seeing what might be even the first tender signs of a shift in their behavior, where they're actually going to incentivize or they're going to reward companies with better sustainable performance. Okay, so another stakeholder group who are incredibly important in all of this is officialdom, the people who make the rules and the people who enforce those rules. And so what should we be expecting from them? Well, first of all, I would say dialogue. There are a lot of companies and a lot of representative groups out there who want progress to happen. This is good. We certainly take that approach, and we would like to have that dialogue. If your view of this is that, well, industry is wicked and everybody else doesn't have a clue, we're not going to have a very good discussion, we're not going to have a good regulatory process. So I think that that's something, dialogue is a very important first step. I think it's very important as well to have a target or goal-based approach to regulation. Tell us what standards you want us to achieve. Let us figure out the best way to do it. Why is that important? It's because it puts an incentive for companies to innovate. It makes innovation a competitive virtue. That's good. Then we are a global industry. We want global regulation. That's why it's so important that IMO stays in the driving seat, that IMO continues to deliver regulatory progress. If we have a fragmentation in the global network fabric of regulation, things get very, very complicated from an operating perspective, and we can also have market distortion. Then we also need to have equality in whatever regulation is developed. We cannot have all of the burden, or a disproportionate amount of burden being carried by one part of the industry, one segment of the industry compared to the other, because it does happen that segments compete with each other. That's certainly true in our world. Next point is that the early adopters, the leaders, those should be protected. Now, unfortunately, in the regulatory world, there's a very poor record of that. Remember ballast water, and we're not finished with ballast water yet, of course, but the rules changed. Companies who, like ours, who had invested in installed systems in good faith early on, had to go and pull them out or upgrade them. That's not really a very encouraging sign. Now we're having the same thing, seeing the goalposts being moved with scrubbers. It would have been a lot better to have rules which were not going to change. And so I think it is absolutely critical that we look after the early movers, because otherwise there is a case for saying, you know what, this is just too risky. I don't know what way the regulations are going to turn next. We're going to wait. And that then doesn't suit anybody's interest. And then last of all, and then those who've worked with me a little bit, it won't be surprised to hear this, is that the rules need to be enforced. And that's so important because as the cost of regulation, of compliance increases, the role of enforcement of the enforcers in maintaining fair competition increases. This is a central issue with Sulphur 2020, and there's every reason to believe that that will continue as we get into the decarbonisation topic. Okay, I just want to finish, nearly wrapping up now, with a view of some other sustainability stakeholders. I've talked about the regulators, I've talked about the industry, and I've talked about innovators. Who else is involved here? Well, we've got investors and lenders and insurers and plants. These are on the supply side in some cases. And what would be very positive to see is that they would favour companies that take a more progressive approach. With customers, we see that their demand for information and progress is increasing very rapidly. We think that's good, but we would like to see that they make sustainability a material part of their procurement decision. Otherwise, what's the incentive to improve? Then employees. Everybody wants to have a great career, but increasingly, the millennials and the Generation Ys, they want something to be part of something of a greater good. And they have a voice here so they can drive overall company behavior, industry behavior. And then media. There is a tendency, especially in the mainstream media, and maybe less in the trade press, to just every time that you read about shipping, it's another horror story of some other kind. Let's call out the good news. I think that would help It would also help. The media can play a very interesting role in helping attracting the world's attention to the challenge, to the opportunity here. So, just to summarize then, I think that in dealing with this enormous challenge, this is inescapable challenge, our indispensable industry will really have to consider the right mindset to take. It needs to be a proactive approach. It needs to be a partnership-based approach, at least in our view. We need to consider engaging. Innovation 2.0. We really have to scale up this innovation, the approach, the effort that's on a global basis. And this is a challenge. This is hard. There are going to be a lot of false dawns. There are going to be companies and all kinds of stakeholders coming forward with wonderful ideas, which actually don't really might seem too good to be true. And so I think that what we have here is we have to really examine these very carefully. There is a massive opportunity. So here is actually what I was planning to show you, is that if we were to tell you that we've cracked it, we know how to move our vessels with zero emissions, just got to put them on low vessels. That's not it. We're not going to fool anybody doing that. So I say it in jest, but the point is serious, that this has to be thorough decarbonisation that we focus on. On the official side, there's an enormous opportunity to do good, to create positive progress, but there is equally a huge potential to waste resources and money and effort and time. We can't afford that. And I think if we look at the broadest range of stakeholders, there is a role for everybody to play in this. And I was thinking about it, that it is a scary challenge. And you might feel that, well, really there isn't any safe way forward. But you have to engage, because in one sense, this challenge is like Brexit. It's no good to be opposed to everything. We have to be in favour of something. And I think the difference maybe between this decarbonisation and Brexit is that at least decarbonisation has to happen. So, thank you very much.